So this really happened. This is July of 2006 at a G8 summit meeting. Former President of the United States, George Bush, tried to give former Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, a back rub. She didn't react so well. Hi, this is Jeff Goldfinger. Welcome to the STEM Signal, where we help the STEM educated increase their career signal above the workplace noise. Now, let's get down to business. So why do you think Chancellor Merkel reacted this way? Well, he forgot to cater to the left. That's the title of today's episode. And this is not meant to be a political statement. In fact, both Bush and Merkel are from essentially right parties, right? The CDU in Merkel's case and the Republican Party in the Bush's case. So this is not about political affiliation. I chose this title as a way to remember the 4 recognizable behavior types that you'll find in any office environment. So that's why I call this the catering to the left. Now, when we look at behavioral types, we often think of personality testing, the things that psychologists have developed. And in fact, in workplaces, we see employers using these. This is an article from Indeed.com that talked about 8 very sophisticated personality tests that are not only used by psychologists, but they're actually used for hiring and retention purposes by a lot of employers. Now, the problem with that, from my perspective, if you're going to increase your STEM signal at work, is that they're too complicated to get cooperative colleagues to take, and also being able to understand their language and the acronyms they use. So I wanted something a little bit easier. So for that, I went back into history and found work by Hippocrates over 2,500 years ago, and it's called humorism. This is his theory of 4 humors that were floating around the body, and he could tell by the relative combination of those humors what type of person they were, what type of behavior. Now, that humorism has largely been discredited by our more recent advanced knowledge of physiology, but his psychological approach to noticing the way people behave is kind of useful. So I looked at it. It has his philosophy had these 4 humors called black bile, yellow bile, blood, and phlegm. And they related to moods of melancholy, choleric, sanguine, and phlegmatic. Oh my God, couldn't remember that either. So quite the mouthful, very hard to remember. So I came up with the mnemonic, cater to the left, L-E-F-T. So let's talk about what those 4 behavioral types are. So here we have a picture of 4 former heads of state. We have on the left, former Prime Minister of India, Indira Gandhi, 2 former US presidents, Trump and Bush, and finally Angela Merkel. Now, if you look at the way each of them behaved, we have Indira Gandhi was what I observe as a leader type, an ego type, a friend type, and a thinker type. And that's where LFT comes from. Leader, egoist, friend, and thinker. So when you ask the question why this didn't work out so well, it's because Bush is a friend type and Merkel is a thinker type. All right, so now let's take out a piece of paper, draw 3 columns. On the leftmost column, the 4 types, leader, egoist, friend, and thinker. And then what we're going to do in part 1 this week, we're going to talk about what to notice about each of those 4 types. Then next week, we'll deal with how to best to interact with them. Quick reminder, as you're starting to take your notes, what I want to reinforce is that all 4 of these people were in leadership roles, but they have different behavioral types. So don't confuse somebody's title or their role with their behavioral type. All right, so how do we figure out what behavioral type they are? Let's start with an office tour in our favorite office, Dunder Mifflin in Scranton, Pennsylvania. So here we have the office's character, Ed Helms, and you'll notice his desk, which is very reminiscent of all leader types, very well organized, no personal accoutrements, looks clean and orderly. As a real-world example, we have Meg Whitman's desk. She was the CEO of Hewlett-Packard. Notice no personal artifacts up on the wall, no pictures of family or friends, no stuffed animals. I think there's maybe that one plant in the back corner, but that's really it. Very clean and organized, all business. This is Lee Iacocca's former office when he was chairman of the Chrysler Corporation. By the way, a little bit of a dig there. Notice the picture of a Ford Mustang when he was at Chrysler, right? Because he had developed the Mustang. That's what made him as famous as he was, but it was a bit of a dig, right? A reminder. All right, so anyway, you'll notice in his office, he has a few personal items. We see some potential pictures here, but they're facing his desk, his chair. The stuff that's behind his chair, the psychological message is, hey, don't talk to me about that. That's my personal life. None of your business, okay? All right, so that's what their office might look like. What about what they wear? Leader types are all about power attire. This is Attorney General Loretta Lynch and Denmark's Prime Minister Helle Thorning-Schmidt. My apologies if I didn't pronounce that correctly, but the leader types wear power suits. They buy fast cars and drive them in the fast lane. And finishing up their characteristics, they tend to write very short emails and use collective pronouns like we and us. Now, this is Steve Jobs, and he was obviously in a leadership position at Apple, but he was driven by his ego. Again, reinforcing the notion that the title and the role that you hold is not necessarily your behavior type. So for our tour around Dunder Mifflin, let's find us an ego, and for that we turn to Michael's office. When we look at Michael's office, what do we find? We see a trophy. We see world's best boss. So it's all about collecting artifacts that remind him that he is the leader of that organization. Here's some real world examples. This is Oprah Winfrey, the woman who named a network after herself, or the Oprah Winfrey Network. Notice what you see here, very large mirror in her office. You see very stylish furniture, okay? The former president of the United States, same thing. Remember, there's no personal artifacts. These are all about accomplishments up on the wall, right? No pictures of people. It's all about what he's accomplished in the world. In fact, the only picture of people is down here below his line of sight. Take a look at his desk. You'll see a lot of folders and pamphlets, etc. The egoist wants to look like they're busy, like they're wanted, like they have a lot of action in their life. We'll talk more about that when we get to contrasting that with the thinker type and how their desk looks. Okay, what kind of cars do the egoists drive? They tend to drive really stylish cars and in the slow lane where they can be seen. Here's an example of somebody who lives in Malibu that owns a Lamborghini Spider, where the speed limit is maybe 35 to 45 miles an hour downtown. Why would you need a Lamborghini there? But that's what egoists do. Here's another egoist car. This is famously Steve Jobs's car. He always parked in the handicap lane, didn't care about the tickets he was getting, and everybody knew it's his stylish Mercedes that was parked there because it didn't have a license plate. You can look this one up. He famously found a little nuance in California state law that allowed him to drive around without a license plate. All right, what kind of clothing do the egoists wear? It's about style. It's all about style. Hair, clothing, everything. It's all about being stylish. In terms of language, a lot of I and me language instead of the leader type who uses a lot of collective pronouns. All right, so that completes our discussion of egoists. Now let's move on to friend types. In our Dunder Mifflin office, we find Jim is a classic example of a friend type. What you'll notice on his desk is he does have the personal touch. He has the photos of friends that he has. He's all in on corporate loyalty. He's got the Dunder Mifflin mouse pad and the mug, and he's got the other stuff, right? And that's typical of friends, right? They're very loyal to their colleagues. They're very loyal to the organization. Here we have a friend type. This is a real estate developer from New York, much like the former president of the US, also worth about $1 billion. And what do you notice about the difference in his office? His office is not replete with photos of all of his developments. It's all about photos of people and family and friends. The subtle signal he's sending is when you walk into his office as a colleague, the first words out of your mouth should be, hey, how are the grandkids, right? He wants to talk about what's going on personally first before getting into business. That's the classic friend type. Okay, friend types play team sports, bowling league, softball, football, soccer, etc. They coach little league teams. They drive high occupancy vehicles like minivans because they want to be surrounded by people. Okay? All right, so that covers our first three: leaders, egoists, friends. Now for our fourth and final, let's look around the Dunder Mifflin office for our thinker type. And for that, we find classically Dwight. And so what do you see at a typical thinker type? It's all about functionality. It's all about reference material. It might be a little disheveled, but the thinker knows exactly where everything is. It's all about functionality. For a real-world example of that, let's take a look at Dr. Andrea Ghez. She is only the fourth woman in history to win a Nobel Prize in physics for her discovery of the supermassive black hole at the center of our galaxy. You'll notice, again, reference sources. She's surrounded by reference material, nothing personal in her office. No photos, no images, no plants. It's all about functionality. Notice her attire. Her attire is all about functional attire. It's not about looking flashy or anything else, okay? Here's another example. You know these colleagues, right? These are the RF engineers who have a picture of the RF spectrum on their wall, right? It's all about reference material and easy access to factual information. Down below, we have Mark Twain. Mark Twain looks like he's disheveled, but the difference between a thinker type like Mark Twain with a busy desk is that he knows where everything is and what's really contained in there, as contrasted by, this was during the president-elect's transition. Before being president, he called for a press conference to show off all of the work he was doing in preparation for the transition. And then what happened? A couple of enterprising reporters tried to get access to the folders and discovered that they appeared to be completely blank. Okay, so again, it's that reinforcement that they want to look important, they want to look busy. All right, so that completes what we notice about each of the four behavioral types. That's part one today. Next week, we'll talk about how best to interact. So before we finish up, I want you to think about, do you know who you are? And for that, we turn to one of my most famous bands. Who are you? So, do you know who you are? Let's find out. Draw on another piece of paper now, two lines, a vertical line labeled 0 to 10 and a horizontal line with the letters LEFT across the top as the axis. Now what I want you to do is put a check mark or an X where you think you lie on each of those four criteria. Now, I've been talking about it as if each of us are only one of these four, but there's usually a blend. So here's what yours might look like. This is actually mine. Again, although I was a leader, I held leadership roles in the Navy as an officer, I was kind of a mediocre officer because I wasn't actually a leader type from the inside. I have a very strong ego, probably why I love to teach and have this YouTube channel. I'm not particularly a friendly guy. I know that sounds strange, but I only have a small number of close friends. I don't go to tailgates. I don't participate in team sports. I much rather do lone sports like martial arts and swimming. Okay, and then I'm a thinker type. I love to do the research on everything I'm doing. So yours should look something like this, where you have, generally speaking, 2 tick marks above the line and 2 tick marks below the line. Now, the thing to notice about this is not to be judgmental about the 4 types. Don't be too hard on yourself. You'll notice I willingly admit that I have a strong ego. My family knows I have a strong ego. We joke about it all the time. It's not something I'm embarrassed or trying to hide. Okay, so whichever way you are, just embrace yourself, right? As Christina Aguilera would sing, right? You know, you're so beautiful, whatever way you are. So the world needs all 4 types. We'd be a far less well-off place without an Oprah Winfrey or a Steve Jobs. So please be easy on yourself. Don't make any judgments. I want you to start now practicing looking left at work. We're going to talk more about what to do with that in next week's episode. In the meantime, here's a quick story to get you started. We have two generals from World War II. Many of you might recognize them as General George Patton, Blood and Guts Patton on the left, and General Omar Bradley, nicknamed the GI's General, on the right. Now, they were both in leadership positions. They both had roughly the same rank as they went through World War II together, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star ranking. But Patton was clearly an egoist, and Bradley was clearly a friend type. And again, you can do your own research to discover that. But the key is these are the kinds of things you have to notice at work to increase your STEM signal, is be aware of who you're working with and how they behave and what they think like. Okay, so for those of you actually in an office setting, walk around your office and figure out who you are and who your colleagues are, and we'll talk more about that next week. I realized I missed the opportunity to have you profile my own office. So let's take a quick look. So what do you see here? Here's my Navy accomplishments, my plaque from instructing at the Navy Weapons School. Here's my plaque for flying E-2 Hawkeyes. You see all my books. This is from the first time I launched off an aircraft carrier. I've got my cigars over here. This is a classic ego thinker, right? It's about me and it's about my reference material. And if you looked at the rest of my office, you'd see something cluttered, but it's all there. It's all about the reference material. If you found this content valuable, please like and subscribe, of course. But to increase your STEM signal, it's actually better for you if you actually forward this to others. Word of mouth is one of the most important ways to increase your STEM signal. If you care about somebody else and you found this valuable and you think they will find it valuable, send them a link to this video and let them know how much you care about them. Don't just leave it up to the algorithm to find them, okay? All right, thank you for listening, and until next time, keep your STEM signal above the noise.